The American Tort Reform Foundation's annual Judicial Hellhole report names a New York City court as the absolute worst in the nation. The foundation calls the asbestos litigation court the most unfair because the judge there has reintroduced punitive damages, allowed lawyers to consolidate unrelated cases, and also taken steps that frequently resulted in multi-million-dollar awards. The Lawsuit Reform Alliance of New York says one of the biggest beneficiaries is the law firm where Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver is of counsel. With me to talk more about that is the Alliance's Executive Director, Tom Stebbins. Welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we should note that New York is moving up on the Judicial Hellhole list, now #1 in the nation. Before we've ranked very high, but it's because of systematic unfairness, according to this report, that we have the dubious distinction as #1.
Yeah, we were #5 2 years ago. We were #3 last year, and now we're #1. And that's in large part because of things that the judiciary has done in the NYCAL, the New York Asbestos Litigation Docket, new rules that they've applied this year that have really made it patently unfair for defendants. And the data bears that out. In the NYCAL, an asbestos case costs the defendants and gives to the plaintiffs, awards the plaintiffs, about 3 times more than it would in any other state.
So just to be clear, you should remind people what we're talking about here. Asbestos was an insulation, a material that was used frequently, actually, back in the day. It's turned out to be quite carcinogenic.
Correct, and mostly it was known to cause something called mesothelioma.
Lung disease.
Yes, and a fun little fact is that if you Google mesothelioma, it is the highest cost per click on Google for an ad. So if you Google mesothelioma and you click on one of the ads, that costs a plaintiff's firm $75.
Wow.
It's one of the highest Google click costs in the nation. And that's because these cases are multi-million-dollar cases. They're worth it.
Okay, so it's a very serious condition,
Absolutely.
and certainly some people are suffering. The epidemiological point at which we actually had the highest number of cases is in the past,
Correct.
However, right?
Correct. And we're still seeing more and more cases, and that's in part because they're expanding the reasons for which you can sue an asbestos claimant. I think the most famous one was a New York congresswoman who smoked for many, many years,
right.
And then she sued Carolyn McCarthy, and then she sued the maker of the asbestos, which was a bankruptcy trust. The company has been bankrupted, as have hundreds of American companies. She sued, saying that her father and brother brought home the asbestos on their clothes,
right,
and that's why she got lung cancer. Now, she smoked for 50 years in between there, so it wasn't the smoking, it was the asbestos.
And what happened with that case?
That case is still pending, I believe.
Okay, and she's retired, actually. She's no longer, Kathleen Rice is taking her place in January. It's the seat out on Long Island. So the interesting thing is, the reason why we've passed that point is because we're not using this stuff anymore.
Nobody's made it for decades, and most of the companies have gone out of business. And that's why the reintroduction of punitive damages is such a crazy thing. First of all, it'll take away money for future claimants. But second of all, it's not going to discourage anybody from using asbestos. Nobody's using asbestos. Nobody's used asbestos for decades. So the introduction of punitive damages is not going to change behavior.
So the request to do this was made by Weitz and Luxenberg, correct? Which is the law firm, and it's gotten a lot of attention over the years because, as I mentioned, Speaker Silver is of counsel there. He's also now getting law clients outside. He just revealed that recently, in recent weeks. But it's his relationship and also the power of the Trial Lawyers Association that really has prevented reforms from going through, and we've talked about that before.
Right, and there's also concerns here, too, about the connection to the judiciary. Speaker Silver appoints the people who appoint the judges, and one of those people is Arthur Luxenberg. Now, a defense attorney described it to me. If you're a judge and you need to go to Arthur Luxenberg to advance in your career, how's that going to affect the way that you treat people in your court? It will have a demonstrable effect. And so, you know, the people often think of the legislation. It goes beyond that. It also goes to the judicial appointments.
So before we really just paint New York as sort of just the worst of the worst, which
it's a
hellhole,
to the report, and that's not me saying it. That's a national organization saying it.
There is a bright spot, and it's on the High Court.
That's right. We have 2 chances coming up in this High Court session in 2015. There were 2 cases. One is the Constantine case, and that's where a number of cases were consolidated. And when they consolidate cases, they take the person with the most injuries, and they take the person with the highest level of exposure, and they take the person with the cutest kid, and they push them all together to create this kind of Franken lawsuit that then they run through the courts. And it's tough for the juries to figure out what's going on. And the data shows that when you consolidate a case, on average it pays plaintiffs about $24 million. For an individual case, it's $7 million. So it's clearly having an effect, and the data shows that. And so the Court of Appeals can rule that no, we can't consolidate the cases. The other case is Dummett v. Crane. And in that case, the lower court ruled that you could be held liable for a product you didn't manufacture or sell. Now, you can imagine that if we open that Pandora's box, that people could be held liable for things that they weren't responsible for, that could have
But you
crazy...
utilized in some way? I mean, you'd have to have some connection to it.
The instruction manual said that the product should be connected with a gasket. And it was known at the time that the gasket would contain asbestos. But the company that instructed the use of the gasket did not manufacture the gasket, did not sell the gasket. They sold the product that connected via the gasket. So it's a very, very dangerous precedent. But we already do this, right, in New York with the scaffold law. We apportion liability even when there isn't necessarily fault.
So are you, okay, so these two cases are sort of coming up.
They are coming to the Court of Appeals.
Are you concerned by the fact that at this point, at least in January and briefly, we're going to have 2 empty seats?
Correct.
Right. Is that going to be problematic for you?
Well, we've actually seen, and I don't know if it's because the Senate switched, but we in the past have had some strong reservations about particular candidates coming up to the Court of Appeals. With the most recent candidates that have been forwarded, we have very few concerns. They're very, very strong jurists and not, frankly, accomplished trial lawyers and plaintiffs' attorneys and personal injury attorneys. And that's, we see that as great progress. And that may be because we now have a Senate that's demonstrably Republican, and they're the ones that confirm these justices.
Right. So we do know there has been one appointment made that's still awaiting confirmation, and then the retirement of Judge Smith actually occurs at the end of this month. And so subsequently, the Senate has to come back. We haven't heard yet from the governor who the replacement for Smith will be.
Right, but we have 7 candidates that are out there.
Yep, and you're okay with all those candidates.
I wouldn't say I'm okay with them, but I don't have any strong reservations as I have in the past.
That's unusual for you,
that
actually.
Is very unusual.
I do want to
That's unusual for New York,
it really
not
is.
just for me.
That's progress. I do want to know also, I mean, New York is hardly alone. I mean, obviously we're focused on New York, but there are other states on this list. California comes in number 2, a very close second.
Correct.
And there are others. So, obviously it's not just New York alone that has problems in terms of its judicial system.
Right. I mean, but there's a lot of things in New York, like the scaffold law, that are really endemic and emblematic of how broken our court system is. And these recent rulings from the NICAL show how backwards it continues to get. And hopefully, with the Court of Appeals session coming up, we have a chance to fix some of those problems.
Well, we will see. I thank you so much, Tom Stebbins, for being here.
Great to be with you.
My pleasure.